Hey, so the objectives of this evening are to come up with a definition of mental health and what impacts mental health negatively, what impacts mental health positively, and then the role of mindfulness in mental health. So first of all, a definition of mental health, if we can feel good about this definition, there's a lot out there. So it's a state of emotional ease and productive mental processing, help people to cope with the stresses of life, to realize their abilities, to learn well and to work well, and to contribute to their community. So there's kind of a spectrum of mental health. It's not static. Mental health is fluid, and whether we're feeling it's up and we're in a good place with our mental health or not a good place with mental health, just like physical health. It's just not a like you're stuck in one space. And for people that do have like mental health issues on the spectrum of anxiety or depression and all the things that come from that, even that can be very fluid, and stress exasperates any conditions that we have. Stress exasperates them. So the causes of mental health challenges, and I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list, but I tried to just get us to think of it. So adverse life experiences, okay, especially those that happen during childhood, can set up for how our brain processes the world. Brain dysfunctions like birth injury or birth issues or injuries, disease, cognitive decline, being spiritually wounded, loneliness. For people in, over 60, loneliness is one of the most prevalent things that cause people to be depressed and anxious. Grief, although it's a natural process, being stuck in grief cause mental health challenges. Trauma, again, and we go to complex trauma, which is childhood trauma. Historical trauma, that's like trauma that's passed down through our DA, passed down from how our parents respond and react in the world, to like a one-off trauma, like a natural disaster or an accident, or being in war, which is very complex also. And then childhood trauma, bullying. Most of the younger people that I see right now are victims of being bullied. Physical pain, being in physical pain for a really long time is not a recipe for wellness. Mental wellness, emotional pain, the side effects of medication. I've had recently even had a client who was on a medication for depression, and she should have come off it. And she finally just decided to wean herself off of it. And a whole bunch of half her anxiety went away. And then, there's known side effects of medication that sometimes people just know that it's going to happen, but it is something that can cause mental health issues. And lack of medication. There are some amazing medications out there to help people with brain functioning, and given in the right doses, working with the right psychiatrist to get those right, can just be a lifesaver for people. Lack of proper nutrition, lack of exercise, and I know you all talked about that the last two times, so I won't go into that. Lack of connection with family, going back to that loneliness, and lack of connection with community. So especially on these bottom 6, it's like, as we head into what helps our mental health, it's proper nutrition, exercise, connection with family, connection with community. So lifestyle that helps with mental health, again, exercise, eating well, and time in nature. And we're going to talk about mindfulness and meditation. And so time in nature isn't like just going out for a walk and thinking of, ruminating about all the hard things that have happened to you, but it's like really being there and being mindful in nature. Sometimes I'll have clients say to get an app so that when they hear a bird sound, they can figure out the bird sounds or what what kind of plant is that? So there's a real sense of mindfulness and learning and appreciation of the beauty, time spent in nature, time with uplifting community. And I think that the work that you all are doing in this nonprofit is to be in and create uplifting community. Therapy with a professional is really important, but the truth is, I have people coming to see me who could just use a good auntie to talk to. So brainstorming with trusted friends, and I think that should say family too. Taking action, especially for people that are depressed, this is really hard. Little steps, incremental steps toward purpose and excitement for life. And then mindful relaxation techniques, which we're going to talk about. But before we go into that, does anybody have any thoughts or questions about what I said? Okay, so hopefully that was really clear. Like mental health is like this. There's things that help it. There's things that hinder it. And for most people, not all, really, for most people, there is a choice, even if we're born with certain, neurodiverse challenges, like ADHD, even at some levels of autism, there is choice, lifestyle, and that can help regulate these things that we're even kind of born with. What is mindfulness, how we can apply it, what it's good for, and then we'll go into a practice from there. So how mindfulness changes the brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain. So I have our brain, it's up here in our head. It kind of looks like a walnut, and there's different sections of the brain. And so I'm just going to like explain it using some pop culture. So way low in the back of the skull, first of all, we have our central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord. And this is our feelers, what's going on, our sensory responses, and then kind of like how we respond to what's happening in our world, what's happening internally. Way low in the back of the skull is a small part of our brain called the cerebellum, and that's our reptilian brain. So when you think of just like a reptile sitting somewhere, and just a movement happens, or a fly goes by, the tongue goes out, pulls it in. That's just real instinctive reactions. We have that too. If we were going to reach for something and we started to feel it was hot, we would pull our hand. So that's the cerebellum back there. And then deep, deep in our brain is what's called the limbic system. So it's tucked in there, and it's our reactive emotion. This is I have the Pele, the goddess from Hawaii, the volcano goddess Pele erupting here. This is the Incredible Hulk. This is like somebody steps on our toe and we're like, ah. This is like the microwave doesn't work when I want to get my coffee warmed up. Ugh. Okay. And so that's just like, it's a reactive, it's emotion, it's memory. It's where fear is processed in the center of our brain. And then around the brain is called the cortex. And it should say the prefrontal, not the refrontal cortex. So the cortex is like the outer covering. Okay. And that's our Wonder Woman, our Captain America, our executive functioning. This is the CEO of our brain. This is like sees everything. This is logical thinking. This is creativity. And when this is the part of us that we develop in adulthood, so that we're not reacting like that 2-year-old, right? I have a 2-year-old grandson. I just, he's right there with his emotions, and it's all very visceral. But this is us going, wow, I want to respond rather than react. And then the prefrontal cortex is very specialized. And this is this place of like leadership where it's compassion, our empathy, our intuition, our wisdom. My heart tells me, my gut tells me. And those are why we know some of these different parts of the brain is because when people get injured, like if they get a actual physical injury to the prefrontal cortex, these kinds of things go away. So that's one of the reasons that they know. Another thing is that we can do brain scans. So when we are performing certain acts, talking in certain ways, they can see what parts of the brain light up. So when we develop this prefrontal cortex, this is our, in yoga, it's called the third eye. It's our wisdom center. This is this place of the wise woman. So I have another PowerPoint similar, like I'm going to be doing that for some firefighters in a couple weeks. And so I have all male icons, but I didn't want it because I knew that we were mostly, not all, but mostly female. So I have Yoda come up, right? Is that just to kind of get an idea of these different parts of their brain and a visualization for them. So I have a couple studies I want to talk to you about. The first thing is down here in the right-hand corner is a picture of a brain scan. And the top of it would be the prefrontal cortex. So this is looking down. Why we know so much about the brain is in the last 25 years, when they started to be able to do these brain scans, they started to hook people up and see what's going on. So a lot of the work, as a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, and a meditator was mostly before then hearsay. This many people have had this experience over the last 5,000 years. And so that was kind of yoga philosophy brings that in, Buddhist philosophy. We get a lot of the instruction on meditation from these old indigenous cultures. And then most of the studies kind of took out that the spiritual part of the meditation mindfulness practices and just did studies on them in that kind of, from a yoga perspective or a spiritual perspective in a very sterile way. But even in that very sterile way of skipping the spirituality of it, it really shows how potent this practice is. Meditation, but I also want to broaden that out to mindfulness, because there are a lot of studies just on mindfulness, like I talked about being mindful in nature. Okay, so the studies that were done, a lot of them were done about 10, 12 years ago, when this was all kind of really getting excited. John Kabat-Zinn was a professor who really kind of, again, he was a Buddhist guy, but he took the Buddhism out and just made it kind of almost like a procedure you do on the brain. And so Dr. Sarah Lazar was her back was bothering her. So she went to some yoga classes, and the teacher was saying, and yoga does this for you, and yoga does this for you. And she's, of course, a scientist, so she's rolling her eyes. Oh my gosh. But she actually started to notice she was feeling calmer. She was feeling more centered. And so she decided to do some studies. And two of the studies that stuck out for me are that meditating daily increases the gray matter in the hippocampus, which is usually has less gray matter. So that's gray matter would be your cortex, in people who are depressed or have post-traumatic stress. So there's actually this healing that goes on in the brain. And we do tend to think, as a society, that our cortex, our brain shrinks as we get older. But what's shown is that meditators have young brains, just like a 35-year-old, that between, like 25 and 35 is when the brain is peaking. And it doesn't necessarily have to go downhill, that we have things that we can do to keep our brain strong and active. And remembering that the brain is actually an internal organ, and it is affected by exercise and by eating well, just like all the other organs in the body. I think what really stands out for me, though, is the work of Dr. Adrian Raine, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he wrote a book called The Anatomy of Violence. He is what he calls himself as a neurocriminologist, and he studied the brains of people who committed violent crimes. And he saw two different things. One is that the person would have like a normal brain, prefrontal cortex working, everything functioning, but they grew up in homes where there was a lot of violence. So it was learned violence. And the way, nutrition growing up was an issue. Getting enough good fats was an issue for a developing brain. But he said, and then there was another group of people who just didn't have prefrontal cortex functioning. And he surmised that they had either had injury or they were born without that part of their brain functioning, which we know you can be born without parts of your body, not functioning. And usually with those people, because they had like no moral compass, that's who we would see would be like serial killers or mass killings. But he said there is 100% hope. Medication, getting the nutrients that the brain needs. And he said this is what keeps me in my business. Meditation can permanently change the brain for someone who's committed a crime, a violent crime. So that's why I do what I do. I just love that.